Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm not quite sure what Mr. Cobb's waiting for. He normally is got his morning update, as he calls it by now. Yesterday we talked about the invertebrates. I did mention one fish, one very early fish that started in the Cambrian, late Cambrian. And I mentioned a couple other things that were basically predecessors to vertebrates, but we saved most of them for today. What is it that, specifically animals, and if plants had to adapt too, the plants are tomorrow's plants and insects. What did animals, and yes, plants technically too, have to adapt for to be able to make the transition from water, which is where we started, onto land? What now?
Lungs.
Okay, lungs from gills was a major adaptation that had to happen. Okay, that's definitely, and that's why amphibians came first, because they actually do that still. They start with gills, and then they change to lungs. So when they change from a tadpole to whatever it is, frog to whatever, they still do that evolutionary adaptation.
Is it possible?
I'm sorry, what?
Is it possible for lungs?
I would have to look step by step at the change from a tadpole to a frog. Like, is there something that's sort of like half and half with them? I don't think there is, but I've never actually looked at the evolutionary stages, of I'm not a biology teacher at all. That would be the type of teacher that I am. So, what about plants? What do plants have to do to really be able to move on? Yes? The ability to do what? Yeah, it's the internal vasculature. There's very much of, depending on what type of organism it is, adaptations that had to happen. Yesterday, when we were doing the non-vertebrate or the invertebrate, however you want to say it, a lot of those things had to develop some type of a protective coating. The opener isn't open. Let me fix it. Probably. We had problems with Canvas this morning, and it wouldn't even open when I first got here. Let me see. Come on. Oh, here. I didn't drop the information into it. It's the problem. Let me do that real quick. I missed one over the weekend when I was doing this. Edit. Assignments. Online. You guys see the text box. Tomorrow from today. You can't even access it until I put all this stuff in there. Okay, if you refresh it, it should. Just a second, refresh it, and it should work. Make sure I didn't do that to tomorrow's too. And so, like I said, there's various things dependent on the type of organism. The other really big thing that had to change was the way that eggs are, I guess created is the right word for it. Amphibians, they have to lay their eggs in water. Like, they don't have a shell. They don't. They have to stay moist. And I know you guys hate that word, but they have to stay damp or the eggs will dry out. And then the offspring, they won't survive. They just won't. It looks like I got the one for tomorrow. Today's the 3rd. Yeah, I know. It's next weekend. I think it's Sunday, actually. I think so. Yeah. Yeah, on the 12th is a professional day for teachers. It's not one of those remote days for you. It's not that. But we're here doing professional development and stuff like that. And then let me pull all the right stuff back up. And then the 15th that Monday, as long as we don't have some kind of freak snowstorm or ice storm or something, that's a weather makeup day. We shouldn't. And I know that there is a chance for snow. At least that's what it says on my phone next week. But that's so far in the future that I wouldn't necessarily bet either yes or no on that. It's just too far away. All right. This is much shorter than yesterday. Yesterday's was a lot. It's just there was so many different really important adaptations in such a short period of time. And yeah, there were a lot of adaptations with the plants and with these vertebrates. It's just the biodiversity wasn't as crazy as it was early on in the Paleozoic. We're still in the Paleozoic. We're still talking about the Cambrian up through the Permian and all of the other ones in between, where true backbones, true vertebrates started was in the Ordovician. Now, notochords, really primal stuff started in the Cambrian, and that was that fish that I showed you, looks sort of like an eel. But those types of fish, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 species that are a descendant of that particular organism that made it all the way through. There's a couple of things, those jawless fish, a couple of images that I did put in your canvas. But the very first things that had backbones, notochords, true nerval pathways, was in that second period of the Paleozoic. Plants started to move on land in the Silurian. Now, these were not what you think of. They're huge trees. These were mostly seedless ferns that had spores in order to germinate. Things like mosses, lichens, things that had to stay next to wherever their water source was because they couldn't pump the water through their tissues the way that modern plants do. Literally lift up the surface. Water will literally climb things because of its surface tension. First insects came on land in the Silurian too. These dragonflies were huge, terrifying, huge. And we'll talk about those things tomorrow. Jawed fish started in the Silurian, but we didn't have an explosion of fish until the Devonian. The first animals started to come on land. And I say animals, amphibians. You had insects and snails, those kinds of things came first. And then things that had backbones, those started in the Devonian. You had a huge explosion of fish. I mean, just almost every type of fish had its origin in that time period, which is why the Devonian is called the Age of Fishes. Which I know fishes isn't like the way you're supposed to say it, but that's what it's called. You had your first reptiles started to come on land in the Carboniferous. In the Carboniferous, this is sort of tomorrow's thing, that's where we had the real vasculature on plants. The plants went much further inland. And then the one after the Carboniferous, the Permian, was called the Age of Reptiles, but they weren't dinosaurs yet. Some of them looked like dinosaurs, but they were proto-dinosaurs. I'm going to show you pictures of these things, like the Dimetrodon. That technically was not like a true dinosaur. Yes, you'll need this one. Get this right down to chordates. At some point in their life, they have a notochord. And at some point in their life, they have gill slits. Now, we do too. But not when we're born. It's when you're very early ages, or the very early days of development, and you're still a fetus. Like, you don't even look like a person yet. You have gill slits. Like, we change. In fact, most, especially mammals, most embryos in the very early stages of development, you cannot tell them apart. You really can't. Until we develop a nice big cranial cavity and we start getting arms and legs. We have a tail for a decent point of time. In fact, My daughter, she was one of those, like, had to have all different kinds of things to be able to have her. And so she had ultrasound very, very early on. And my husband goes, "Oh, that's a boy." I said, "No, it's not. That's a tail." He's like, "Oh, no, I know my son." And I'm like, "No, and it being a girl, we have tails. We essentially grow into them." Well, I say that, and there are some people that are born with tails. Because it is not the most appropriate of looking image if you look them up. Okay, you're gonna do it. Okay, but if you've ever seen a picture of a human tail, you know what I'm talking about. You're all gonna do it right now. I swear. Oh, okay. I'm just warning you. What it look like? No. All gonna do it now. Okay, most people, if they are born with a tail, the parents like to have it removed.
This guy has one on his back.
Uh,
Oh my God, the
People
stomach.
ask, do they wag? I don't think so. Those are conversations I get to sometimes in my class. Most of us, we grow into that. It's essentially our tail bone.
This rich they need to raise for some people.
Okay, awesome.
That is so weird.
I know, it's weird. Anyways, back to this.
They're not normal people.
Vertebrates are a type of chordate. Okay, so now some chordates, things like, well, I'll show you when we get to the tree of life in just a second, because I think that's on the slide. Some chordates, it's not what you think of. They don't develop that hard backbone. They still have the neural pathway. It's just not a spine like we have, or like a dog has, or a cat has, or a mouse has. The ancestors of these chordates, because they were fleshy, they were very soft, delicate tissue. Until we had those harder parts, we don't have a lot of record of what those ancestors were. We really, like I said yesterday, we really didn't get a lot of body fossils, which you think of as a fossil, until the Cambrian, when they had those exoskeletons. Now, we are related to everything that has a notochord. We are related to echinoderms, or things like starfish. We're really far away on the tree from them, but we shared a common ancestor called the deuterostome. It split a heck of a long time ago. And you had the echinoderms, which are things like sea flowers and starfish and sand dollars and those kinds of things. And then you have the chordates, which is the all vertebrates, fish, all different kinds of things. And I should have put this image in your canvas. You don't necessarily have to know like all of their names, but this tree of life just show you a very, 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 very long time ago, we split from the echinoderms. But we do share a common ancestor. I mean, technically, evolutionary speaking, everything shares a common ancestor if you go back far enough. But we obviously took this route over here. And you guys should have somewhere in your stuff. We talked about these yesterday, the sea flowers. Fish. Very first fish, the one that we talked about yesterday, technically started in the very, very, very late Cambrian. Like extremely late Cambrian. And obviously they're still around today. There are 5 major types. This first one, the jawless fish, they flourished in the Devonian. You're going to see the Devonian repeated over and over and over and over on here. Placoderms, the ones that have jaws, like more modern fish, they flourished up through the Carboniferous and then they went extinct. Like they only lasted for a very short period of time. And I have another image, it should be the last thing in Canvas, that shows you where the fish started. They had major extinctions and then they kept going, or in the case of the placoderms, they actually went totally extinct and they died out 100%. Spiny sharks, once again, Devonian. The ones that had cartilage, sharks, rays, they're related to each other. They started in the Devonian, but they went absolutely crazy exploding in numbers later on in the Paleozoic. Bony fish, also in the Devonian. I believe the coelacanth, I don't want to lie to you, I'm going to double check it. I want to say the coelacanth's a bony fish, which we thought that they had gone completely extinct. Let me double check. I don't want to tell you something that's not true.
I was looking for fish in that country.
Is the coelacanth CEOO?
Isn't a sturgeon considered like a dinosaur?
Yeah, they're an older type of, yes, very old type of body style.
Sturgeon.
Is the coelacanth a bony fish? It's a weird looking.
It's like a, you know, those little sucker fish that like you have in tanks. It's like that, but like 1,000 times bigger.
They are bony fishes. I was right. Okay, so the coelacanth, we thought it was completely extinct, and then fishermen brought one up. I've seen one before at the Philadelphia Aquarium. I don't know if there's one at the Fort Worth. There probably is. No, they have like arms. Like you can see the fingers in their fins. Like, it's really weird.
Wait, what is it called?
A coelacanth?
Sealkin?
Coelacanth. It is spelled CEO LACANTH. It's like, oh, it's just weird. There are a few fish actually that look like they have feet, like they have hands, but a lot of them are very, very, very deep ocean. I don't remember if I put another one on here or not. Let's see. Is it there? Oh no, yeah, there is. Okay, so the Devonian is called the Age of Fishes. This is where you had the largest development of the major classes of fish. Yes, some of them, they didn't make it. Some of them made it a lot further. I can't remember I think it's the stonefish that has feet. Let me see. I should have put some of these images on here. I'm pretty sure it's a stonefish. Stonefish feet. Images. Yes, it's the stonefish. It literally has like feet that come down underneath it. It's really, really, really weird.
You know what a Greenland shark is?
Those are supposed to be really old too. They have like an extra slit for their gills or something like that. Or they only have 5 and they're supposed to have 6. I do remember learning something about them. Now, sharks and rays, they haven't changed much.
Greenland shark lifespan is 400 years.
That's pretty nuts. They're supposed to be really deep ocean dwelling too, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, this is the last thing that you guys have. I put it at the end. Except for these jawless fish, most of these developed. They really took off in the Devonian, which is this orange one right here. Most, like I said, the placoderms, they went out in the Carboniferous. They stopped there. And some of these went through extinctions, like the jawless fish. There's a few of them, but there's not many. The cartilaginous fish, which is quite a few of them. There was in the Permian extinction, the one that we're going to talk about Friday, there was a huge die-off, but you can see that most of them started back up again. Sharks and rays, they went nuts after the Cretaceous extinction, the one that wiped out most of the dinosaurs. That's when they went ahead and just took off. They weren't as affected in the ocean. So you guys should have this somewhere. Amphibians. These are the first vertebrates to leave the water and go on to land. If you know anything about amphibian life cycle, which we were talking about earlier in the period, they start off in the water. Amphibian eggs are jelly-like. Okay, when a mommy frog lays her eggs, it's almost like this frothy material that sort of keeps all the eggs together so they don't float away and become food. They stay where the frog lays them. They develop, hatch as tadpoles. Tadpoles have gills. Eventually, the tail gets absorbed by the body. They start growing legs. And then once their lungs develop, which you had brought up, and I wish I knew how to answer your question 100%, but I don't. Once their lungs develop, they can go on the land. But they have to stay near water. Frogs and toads are different. Their life cycle is the same, but how toads have more of a hard, almost like, not scaly like a reptile, but they have a harder skin. They don't dry out as easily as a frog does, which is more slimy and soft. They had to stay by water. They had to keep going back to the water in order to lay their eggs. So they don't venture far from wherever they were born. They really do not go that far. They had to deal with drying out, so they stayed by their water source. They had to go back to the water to lay their eggs, so for reproduction. They had to deal with the fact that they were not supported, their weight was not supported by water. They had to deal with the crushing effects of gravity, one of the reasons why they have bones. And they had to develop lungs, which was something that somebody had mentioned for answering the opening. These were the major things that animals had to overcome to get out of the water, at least to start moving on to land. Now, obviously, reptiles took it further than this. Specifically, these two. Those two right there. Because reptiles don't have to go lay their eggs in water. They have an amniotic egg. Huge evolutionary development to be able to colonize the land better. Middle Carboniferous. This is when the reptiles started to go further inland. In the Carboniferous, like I said, I'm not trying to talk too much about tomorrow's lesson, but the plants developed seeds to prevent their offspring from being eaten by insects. They developed that hard seed coat, which kept those things from drying out. And my computer is just going crazy with email. And they also developed the internal vasculature so that the plants didn't have to stay next to their water source. So once the plants moved further inland, here came the reptiles. And the huge difference, I think there's one more on here, there is. The huge difference between a reptile and an amphibian is that hard outer shell of the egg. It didn't have to be laid in water. Now, reptile eggs are sort of soft, unlike chicken eggs, which are hard. I mean, you squeeze it and it's gonna, pop. But it's almost like more of like a firm water balloon type casing for most reptile eggs. Not all, but most of them. You can see the amnion when you open an egg, like a chicken egg, not the shell, but underneath that, there's like a sac. And if you take a chicken egg and you put it in vinegar and you give it about a day, when you pull that egg out, the shell is gone and the egg is still inside that sac. I mean, if you crack an egg, there's like a film inside of it. The liquid is underneath that membrane. And there actually can be gas exchange across them too, but I'm not going to go too far into egg evolution. There's a waste sac inside the egg. And it's just more protection for the embryo. But reptiles are the ones that, except for insects, but insects are not vertebrates, they're different. Reptiles were the first vertebrates to really push far inland. Earliest reptiles. Carboniferous is split into two. There's the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian. And then most of those are having sometimes a lower, a middle, and an upper as you go more towards modern day. But in the Pennsylvanian, Captorhinomorph is this little guy. I'm going to show you an image of it. I think it's on the next slide. These were the first ones to colonize further inland. These are the predecessors of all of the other reptiles that are on land. They were small, they were quick, they primarily ate insects. A snail is not an insect, it's a mollusk, but I'm sure they ate snails too. They most likely ate smaller amphibians. They were quick, almost like you've ever seen a green anole? The ones where the heads bob up and down and a little red flag comes out? They were similar to those. But your dinosaurs evolved from these little teeny tiny quick reptiles. All right, so the captain rhinomorph is this guy down here. Looks like what you think of is just a little ground lizard. Sort of like a skink, or even like a gecko, but geckos climb up walls. There's two major branches that developed from this ancestor of almost all land reptiles. The pelycosaurs, these eventually turned into mammals. Okay, now, this is a Dimetrodon. This is not a dinosaur. This is a proto-dinosaur. Dinosaurs came after these guys. The therapsids, these are the ones that developed into almost all of the types of mammals. They're obviously reptiles here, but they are mammal-like reptiles. These are warm-blooded. The cold-blooded, these are the guys that turned into what you think of as like T-Rex and velociraptors and all of those guys. Legs, both of them primarily underneath with a therapsid, and then the other guy, it's more of what you think of as your classic dinosaur shape. But a Dimetrodon was technically not a dinosaur. They went extinct in the Permian. A pelycosaur, there's two of them here. The Dimetrodon, the one that you probably are familiar with, that was carnivorous. The one above it, Edaphosaurus, that would have been the more mammalian type. There's a big difference in their jaw structure. The big sails on their back probably had to do with heat regulation. And I'm pretty sure it had to do with attracting mates too. I mean, but those kinds of structures help regulate body temperature. These guys, theoretically, what we think of, since we're warm-blooded organisms. We really can't tell because we don't have one to go back and look at. Well, not a living one. Therapsids were the ones that survived the Permian extinction. And the pelycosaurs did not survive the Permian extinction. Like I said, we'll talk about that on Friday. Very, very, very quick transition once we started having mammals. Because mammals were developing at the same time that dinosaurs were. Everybody seems to think that mammals were way, way, way after dinosaurs. No, they were small. Dinosaurs some of them were small, but most of them were much larger. The mammal-like ones had more tooth differentiation, so they weren't all just sharp teeth. You had more that were like our molars. Excuse me. The legs were more directly underneath them and not splayed out to the side. The hip structure is completely and totally different between these two major branches of proto-dinosaurs, these Permian reptiles. There's one. See what?
Dino.
Oh, what?
Dino hunting.
Dino hunting. Most of the big bad ones, you put up a human against it without any kind of technology, and we don't have a chance. We don't. I don't know why this thing is making so much noise. I'm gonna turn it off. I accidentally, it fell on the ground, and it has, there's something in there that's loose, and I don't want to drop it again. I don't know what happened, but I know it's making a lot. I may have to buy a new one. They're not that expensive. All right, so the therapsids, so the major reason why they think that they were warm-blooded, endothermic like us, is because they weren't found just primarily in warm climates. They had more extended areas of latitude. That means that not necessarily at the equator, they moved more towards the poles. They found their bones, their fossils in a wider area than they did the other type of proto-dinosaur, which developed into what you think of as dinosaurs, the cold-blooded versions. Almost late Permian therapsids. All right. The Permian extinction, which is what we're going to focus on Friday, took out about 70% of all amphibians and reptiles. The Permian extinction took out 96% of all marine life. All marine life. And when we get into the topic on Friday, we'll talk about the things that did happen. Now, there were multiple extinctions through the Paleozoic. There's one up at Ordovician, there was one up near Devonian, like it kept happening, but life kept coming back. This one almost took out everything. There's a couple different, you don't need to know their names over here. Couple different types of therapsids. The one on the top is definitely more mammalian looking than the one on the bottom. But both of these had more mammal-like features than they actually did reptilian-like features, which ended up somehow, some way evolving into all mammals. But they started out this way. All right, that's the last one that I have. Like I said, today was way shorter than yesterday. Yesterday was a long one. Let me freeze this, and I need to double check online. Double check who's missing stuff. You've got 15 minutes. Let's see. Stop this. Stop this.